Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast brought to you by Renthal Street. Check out renthal.com, the Fit My Bike tool, to see all the parts available for your make, model and year of motorcycle. On today's Paddock Pass podcast, we're going to be looking at the Dutch Round the World SBK, and we've got a last minute dropout. Gordo, it's only myself and yourself. Evo's a little bit too busy to be able to join us today.
Yeah, the hardest working act in rock and roll is our friend Evo, and he's just had something come up today that he's had to work absolutely all day, as opposed to wasting time talking to reprobates like you and me for a while.
Obviously enough, we'll miss Evo for this, but we had him on Thursday for what was actually a really cool podcast for our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. We were joined by the title protagonists. It was Toprak and Bulega joining us, and Toprak even tried to be a podcast producer at one stage during it. He tried to be a rider manager for Bulega as well. And at the weekend, Gordo, he was the big protagonist for Bulega, but it was a really strange weekend. Bulega had all the pace, only comes away with 25 points. Toprak was nowhere all weekend, and he comes away with the gap now down to 21 points because Bulega had a couple of technical problems.
Yeah, it's hard to think that when Toprak could only qualify third and then finish the first race outside the podium, then win a race and then finish eighth, and it was actually a better weekend for him than it was for Bulega, which is mind-boggling to think about. It was actually a more positive weekend for Toprak than it was for Bulega, despite all the early evidence. So it just shows you how everything that's a certainty in motorcycle racing is not a certainty, and we've already gone from everybody talking about it's a Ducati Cup after one round, and then it's going to be a BMW Cup again after the second round, and here we are, not only Ducati and BMW in the big mix this weekend, which is great.
And then we ended up with Yamaha winning with Locatelli. So it was a really interesting weekend. Just for Bulega as well, GP1, the Italian website, Gordo, they revealed this morning that it was a crankshaft sensor failure for Bulega. And these bikes, they're so technical, but everything comes down to the electronics on them. And electronics are only as good as the sensors used for them. And sometimes you can end up having the cheapest part on the bike costing you all those points.
Yeah, sensors on bikes are everything's, as you say, is electronics, and the trouble is if one of those sensors doesn't work properly, something happens. When it's a crankshaft sensor, which literally tells the ECU where the engine is, which then affects the fuel, affects the ignition, it affects every single other aspect of the motorcycle actually running, then you've got problems. Obviously, he had a problem in the first race, and then at the time they weren't sure if it was the same problem that recurred. I spoke to the team owner after the first problem, but at that time, literally just after the race, they didn't know, they hadn't had the chance to investigate. Obviously, they now have, and our colleague over at GP1 has now put this out as the real reason why, and they might only have found that out very recently. But yeah, it's often the 10-cent part that goes wrong, but it's especially true with electronics. And when it's a sensor as important as that one, which then tells everything else what to do and when, then you're in trouble. And I honestly have to say, I don't know if that's a replaceable sensor or something you can upgrade, or whether it's just the road bike one, which will already be a sophisticated bit of kit, but it's not necessarily meant to be used in racing situations, taken, plugged in, plugged out, etc. What the really weird thing is that they obviously couldn't find a reason for the first one, and it happened again. If we're assuming it's the same sensor, and even if it isn't, that's even worse, because that means that two different things happened and went wrong on a factory bike in consecutive races. Well, there was no crash damage. There was no, there was no kind of obvious, that's what it is. And the second race was dry, so it's not like, we missed something because it was wet. The whole thing just looks worse the more you look at it.
Bit of a strange one as well, Gordo, because sometimes for sensors, you can take it back into the pit box, run all your checks, and it doesn't flag up. It's only whenever it's actually out on the racetrack that these issues can show up. But this weekend was also a strange one, Gordo, because this was the first weekend where we saw the impact or a change in the fuel flow control and the regulations for that. And Ducati and BMW, they both lost 0.5 of a kilo per hour in what they were able to have through the fuel flow. And speaking to some of the Ducati teams, they said this was costing them round about 2 horsepower at the end of the straight. But Bulega was quite interesting in how he perceived the difference as well.
His expression was, if I remember exactly correctly, he said it just makes the bike feel a bit dirty at the top end, like it's not running crisply or whatever. And that 2%, if they say that after the fuel control they feel that they're losing 2 horsepower, well, that would be it, because the engine wants more and it can't run the way it wants to run. And you can allow for it, and they have allowed for it, and so on. But it just means that it's not as crisp all the way. They can with the electronics. They are so clever now. They can run right up to 50 RPM within a rev limit. They can make the bike run really well the whole way through, given the limits of the mechanical system they're starting with. But when you literally can't get enough fuel flow through, there's nothing you can do with the sparks to fix it. You can make the overall engine more efficient, so it needs less fuel, even at the top end, and that's the next stage everybody's going to do. But we're talking new engines and new homologations in 5-10 years down the line here.
Just to move on to some of the big news stories the weekend, Gordo. Unfortunately, we were 2 rounds in, we're now 3 rounds in, and already all the talk is about next year and what happens with Toprak. What happens with Bulega? Bulega is going to get re-signed by Ducati, no doubt about that. Could be confirmed as soon as Cremona. And for Toprak, it's a little bit different. And the reason for that is Toprak's a little bit different. He's a rider that always wants to be challenged. BMW could come in and offer him the world. And if it's not the move that he wants to do for next year, he won't take it. He's made it perfectly clear he wants to be in MotoGP. Ideally, he wants to be next year. He'll settle for 2027. And if he can't, then he might look to stay at BMW. But Toprak right now looks like a rider he's kind of over it for being on the BMW. He's achieved what he can achieve there, and he's kind of looking elsewhere already. And obviously, Evo wrote during the week about a potential move to Pramac Yamaha. We've obviously talked about it on the podcast at the end of last season, that with Paolo Provesio going to replace Lynn Jarvis and Yamaha, that this would be an option for Toprak. That's obviously still going to be the case. Honda's another option, and it's all tied into all the different rumors that we hear. David wrote on motormatters.com that Pedro Acosta has a 5 or 6 million euro buyout clause. He could go to Honda. Toprak could go to Superbikes and then replace Joan Mir down the line. There's an awful lot of chess pieces getting moved around the board. And typically, Gordo, when we hear so many different rumors, there's something to it.
Yeah, I think there has to be if I was Toprak, I'd want to move next year anyway, because you've already achieved what you set out to do going to BMW last year. We all knew at the end of last year that changed the dynamic for what might happen with him in the future, purely because it was a overachievement of what was expected. We knew he would do amazingly well because, as we've joked about before, he could ride a unicycle and still do well. But at this point in time, the BMW is not working the way it should. They've obviously had a big off-season change from what they were expecting in the super concession, which has obviously had an effect. So we now think that we can see that Toprak and the bike running well was definitely why he was able to win 3 races. But remember, all 3 races in Portimao, one of his favourite tracks, Bulega was right on him. I mean, absolutely right on him, less than a second every time. So that's a change. If you're looking at him thinking, BMW, is that going to be as competitive next year? Well, maybe, because they'll be allowed to make the changes for next year. There'll be a plan to make changes if they really do find there's a problem with it being made to run the 2025 chassis. Although that was designed to take in the optimizations they made on the super concession chassis in 2024. So is BMW attractive for Toprak right now? Probably not. Is Toprak attractive for BMW? Who are they going to put on the bike that's going to do what he can do? I mean, nobody. Probably, definitely nobody. So they're going to have to kind of rely on Toprak to stay there for them to be a truly competitive package, unless they bring somebody amazing from MotoGP or whatever, but that doesn't seem likely.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones, Gordo, where in GP, you're looking at if Toprak goes to replace Jack Miller, maybe Miller comes to BMW. In World SBK, if you're BMW, maybe you knock on Jonathan Ray's door again, but until Johnny comes back onto the bike, there's not going to be a lot of suitors for him. And
and proves what he can do.
Exactly. And I think that it looks like Johnny should be back on the bike for Cremona. Speaking to him just earlier, he said that that's still very much the goal for him, but he needs to get back as soon as he can. One of the things that's quite interesting about Toprak, Gordo, and we'll have this as a little bit of a Paddock Pass podcast exclusive, because one of the things we've heard a lot about is if Toprak goes to Honda in Superbike, he'll have all of his Pirelli experience, he'll test the new bike, and he'll be ready to rock in 2027 as a MotoGP rookie. One thing that I learned at the weekend was that Pirelli have been told that they can't use their World SBK tyres. They have to turn up to MotoGP with a brand new concept of tyres. So all of the details they have from their production tyres, they can't use in MotoGP next year. So that means that it looks like with the 850 regs and the change in rules and bikes for 2027, Pirelli are going to have a whole new profile, whole new size, new structures, new compounds. So it looks like MotoGP at the moment is using 17-inch rims. They'll go down to probably 16.5 and things like that. They'll change the profile. Looks like it's going to be a very narrow front tire compared to what we have in World SBK. So Toprak's big advantage going to MotoGP in 2027 was talked about as being he's the man that knows the Pirelli tires better than anyone else. And he'll know the philosophy behind the Pirelli, but he won't know the tires whenever they go to MotoGP. So a little bit of a change there for what's being projected in MotoGP. And one of the other things that was interesting from my sources within Pirelli was that Pirelli have also been told that when they come in as the MotoGP tire supplier, there has to be a 1.5 to 2 second differential between a MotoGP lap time and a Superbike lap time. So the reason for this is, as we've always said on the pod, Gordo, manufacturers want to stay as 1,000cc bikes, and the way to do this is to slow down the bikes. Easiest way to do that, we've got the fuel flow regs, but more than anything, it's tyres.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that the interview I did with Pirelli's head man, Giorgio Barbier, in Portimao was the opposite of all that. So obviously there's been a, call it what you will, a directive, a notification, a digestion of that, and it's come back as maybe we need a bit more, which we always said. It's, if you're making normal production tyres on a 240 horsepower World Superbike, that you're at the edge of it now. And let's not forget the real problem that Toprak had in the dry second race in Assen was actually a blister on the right hand side of his rear tyre. Not a big blister, apparently, but a blister, i.e., that the tyre's not unitary the way it should be. Obviously, because of the massive extreme use. And Assen is one of those tracks, because it's so fast. It is always you're always a wee bit on the edge for the tyre, if you'll pardon the pun, of performance. It was always, to me, the idea that you would be able to run the Pirellis with a slightly different, exactly the way they are. No, I think the production process could be mass produced still, but it's going to have to be, as you say, a different tyre, not just because of regulation and size, but because maybe they think these 850s are still going to need, something special. But the knock-on effect of that might be for World Superbike, they were going to get less effective tyres, which again goes completely against the philosophy that Pirelli have always had, which was, though people didn't believe them all those years ago, 20 odd years ago, when they took over the single make tyre in World Superbike, they did want to develop the tyres and get better tyres every year. Maybe not in the same white heat of competition if it was a free tyre class, but they didn't sit on their laurels, they never have. And it's very noticeable that most people used another rear development tyre on the weekend in Assen. It wasn't the standard tyre, it was a one off the development list.
You've always said as well, though, Gordo, that with them coming into MotoGP, that's where they can use it to develop their tyres as well, and then we can take that step back. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for that down the line. But we might as well, we're 15 minutes into the podcast, Gordo, we might as well start talking a little bit about the weekend and what we saw on track, because we need to talk about Andrea Locatelli. It's been, over 150 starts in the Superbike World Championship. He's finally a race winner.
Yes, and obviously there was a couple of weird results and weird happenings ahead of him. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. However, hasn't he looked great? Portimao, and especially in Assen. When he had that podium in Portimao, you just saw his chin sticking out a bit further. He was just his shoulders were a bit more square set back. There was a lot of that, and I've spoke to the Yamaha people about it, and they said that a lot of that was to do with him, and especially at Assen. The bike's good at Assen, they like Assen, but a lot of that's to do with Loca, who has, as we spoke about at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, Locatelli has to step up. Well, it seems like he has. He himself, whatever else on the Yamaha, and there's been a lot of small and one large, i.e. the super concession chassis, which makes the bike a bit less stiff in certain areas where they won't tell us exactly. But I think we can all work out that it's basically a softer, more forgiving, greater feedback to the rider chassis. That feels better, is what they say. Flexes feel to a limit in any motorbike. When something's moving a bit, that's transferring in the rider through the handlebar, through his feet, through his knees, through his butt, is going, oh yeah, this is happening now. I'm getting near the limit. This feels better, feels worse. If the bikes are too rigid, the tyres are too rigid, you can't feel anything until suddenly you're on your backside. So Loca is a very clever rider. He's sometimes one of these riders that's too clever, but he's definitely made a move forward. He's got a genius crew chief. Yamaha's done a lot of work in the winter. I think the thing about Yamaha is that shows the direction for other people. When you get all the right ideas, when you get all the right, and obviously when you get a concession, if you can make a good enough case for all these things, and you get the right people in the right place at the right time, your results will come. The BMW is not a magic bike. The Ducati is obviously much more race focused than most things, but it's not a magic bike. Look at the results of the weekend. The Ducati Cup is not really. So it's still the best bike to be on, but you've got to get it to work properly. And the rider's got to be happy, and the right crew chief and everything else. Yamaha are doing a lot of things right. And the next stage of that, which is what you might be talking about next, Steve, is when Jonathan Ray's fit and comes back. Maybe he's coming back to a much better Yamaha than he had last year, with the knowledge, because his teammate's doing something really cool. And there was also a podium for Remy Gardner at the weekend. Yamaha is looking good now.
I think,
but it's because of lots of things. It's not just because.
That's quite interesting with that, Gordo, is obviously Cremona's going to be a little bit of a wild card. If Johnny comes back for that, we can't read too much into it. But Misano's an interesting one, because the bike should work well there. Because what was interesting for me at the weekend was Yamaha hasn't brought a new engine, but because it's able to have that little bit more drive grip, a little bit more confident for the riders, we were able to see that Locatelli could go with Bulega on the exit of the double right-handers before the fast end of the lap. Mm-hmm. So if you're at somewhere like Misano and you're able to come out of Tremonto with a little bit more drive, maybe you stick with them heading up to Curvone instead of just being swamped. So maybe at Misano we're able to see something from them. But Locatelli at the weekend was super impressive. He qualified well. They knew that if they could qualify well, they'd race well. But to come away with podiums in both the feature-length races, to have, I think Locke is the only rider that's finished all 9 races so far this season in the points. He's third in the championship and he's there on merit. He probably has been a little bit undervalued at times in the Superbike paddock. But his first 3 years in the championship, he finished in the top 5 in the world. And then last year, obviously, took a bit of a step back as Yamaha struggled a little bit more. But Locke is a very good rider. I know you've always been a bit of a champion for him, Gordo, from when he jumped onto the Super Sport bike and then what he could do immediately on a Superbike.
Yeah, I mean, when he joined the team he did in World Super Sport, immediately the team just said, it's like this guy's been to racing university. Everything, he just understands everything. We do a change and he'll tell you what it's like and he'll tell you why. As I say, sometimes you can take that a bit too far. Andrew Pitt always said they had to reel him back in a bit and say, right, look, stop worrying about what you're going to do in the bike. I'll worry about that. You tell me what it's doing and I'll fix the bike and then you tell me if it's better. But yeah, he's a very hard-working little guy. He comes from Bergamo and he's always banging on about how hard-working Bergamese people are. Bergamaschi, I think they're called, compared to a lot of places in other parts of his country and that region. So we get up early, we work hard and so on. And his work ethic is second to none. That's important in racing. But he's a proper talented rider. He's as good a Grand Prix reject, if people want to use that word, as we've ever had. And he showed it by absolutely blasting holes in Supersport and in his first year. I mean, there was nobody else at the pictures. And he did really well on a bike which was clearly waning. And as we saw, Toprak won the World Championship on it. But even then, people round about the periphery were going, that was another Toprak World Championship more than Yamaha. And that's not taking anything away from Yamaha. The bike was capable, but he only in the hands of Toprak. So, yeah, I think Locker could be hot property for people. He's not a genius like Toprak. He's not a 6-time world champion like Jonathan Rea. He's not a MotoGP very good rider, not quite made it to the top of Bautista, our traditional recent big three. But he is improving, and that's all you need to do, is get better every year, and all of a sudden you'll be world champion.
Yeah, and the Yamaha is definitely improving as well. And one thing that was interesting at the weekend, Gordo, was we spoke about it momentarily there about Toprak and his blistering with the tyres. But at the weekend, BMW just really struggled. And Toprak did well. Obviously, the Super Pole race, able to pick up a race win. But race one, his pace dropped off by 3 or 4 seconds a lap at one stage. He had nothing on the front, nothing on the rear. And then in Sunday's second race, when everyone else seemed to be able to manage the tyre pretty well, he really struggled at the end.
Yeah, it's quite obvious that he doesn't like big flowing tracks, and there are some very short and very tight sections at Assen now, but it's basically a big long flowing track. They've set up with a bike, they just couldn't find one. I think it's also very significant for a lot of the results this weekend is that no one tested there. You can't test, everybody's tested at Portimao at some stage, even if it was months ago last winter or more recently, and everybody had a 2-day test before we got anywhere near a racetrack at the first round in Australia. In Assen, everybody came blind, and BMW are using their new bike again. They've not got their super concession chassis they had last year. They were coming there with a standard road bike chassis, with obviously whatever stiffening modifications are allowed, but it's not a super concession version. So, there was a lot of unknowns. The Ducati were the most known, but Yamaha's made a lot of changes, and clearly the changes for Yamaha worked. So I think that's got a lot to do with it as well. I think that's another reason why everything wasn't nailed on, because people hadn't had a chance to nail it on. But BMW, of all those people, struggled. If Ducati hadn't had two, and if we understand that what we've heard now, two minor sensor problems, then they wouldn't be talking about a Locker win. We would be talking about 3 Ducati wins. So
3 Bulega wins.
3 Bulega wins, and clear Bulega wins, and hasn't that guy moved forward and on in every regard?
Just when you look at it, Gordo, for Yamaha as well, one of the big changes they had over the course of the last 6 months, Nicolo Bulega coming in as their project leader for Superbike now in place of Andrea Locatelli. Bulega is a really interesting person for that, because obviously very experienced, very talented rider. Became a test rider for Yamaha, still raced endurance up until last year. But more than anything else, he understands that you can make all these developments to the bike, you can make all these changes. If the personnel in a pit box isn't right, and if the rider doesn't feel right, it doesn't add up to anything.
Yeah, I got to speak to him at the end to ask all about the after the final race in Locker's win, about the changes. What was the real effect of all the changes in the winter? And started talking about the technical stuff, because obviously there has been a quite significant one. So I think without that, basically what he said is, without that, the super concession chassis, we don't know what would have been possible to do. But he also spoke a lot about the people, the personnel, and the way of working and how they work together as one of the big reasons why it was there. They've got to where they got to. I'll actually read you the quote that I wrote for what he said at the weekend. For sure, the super concession chassis helped, but it's also the whole package that is working. I believe there has also been a huge step from Locatelli, because now he has a better self-belief. He knows how he can fight for victories, etc., etc. The whole package is a step, maybe 2 steps, and that is what we are looking for. There you go.
And obviously enough as well, Gordo, for Yamaha and for Paul Denning, there was a big moment on Sunday to have that release, because Locke has been with them for a long time. The change from Andrew Pitt to Tom O'Kane, for Tom it was a really important moment as well. I actually went down to the pit box just to give congratulations to everyone just before I flew out to Amsterdam. But for that team, they're a special team, Crescent. They make everyone feel very welcome. But it's been tough times for them since Toprak left, and suddenly they're able to show we can still get it done.
Yeah, and it's particularly tough because the solution was at hand. They signed the solution. It was all very political, financially complicated, you name it. But they got Jonathan Ray to replace Toprak. Good choice. Now, it didn't work out that way for a million different reasons. But seeing Locatelli, their long-term rider, and changes they've made working, personnel and otherwise, and culminate in a race win this early in the season, even with all the new kit and the new tech coming, you would expect it maybe happen 3, 4, 5 races down the line. Maybe it had to be a slower racetrack. But to win in Assen, even though Locatelli clearly loves the joint, and obviously did a lot of GP racing there, his experience of Cremona and Most would be limited. He would imagine not being a MotoGP rider for all those years. But he just obviously connects with it. But yeah, the joy in the team is great, and they are a World Championship winning level team. That must have been, as they say, as much relief as joy. And to me, those two things added together. And vindication. Every time anybody wins something when they've had a bit of adversity and so on in their career, whether it's a team, whether it's anybody else, sooner or later somebody comes out with a V word, vindicates their efforts. Their efforts already, right now, somebody is reporting back to Yamaha headquarters in Japan saying, hey, we won a race, 3 races, and all those changes and all that money we spent in the winter, and all these people we've signed, it's all paid off. Thanks very much.
Do you know what I loved most, Gordo? The fact that Loco was in Parc Ferme saying, I earned this, I've worked hard, I've done this, it's my moment. And I thought it was great because Bulega can talk all he wants about teamwork and, everything matters together. When the bike failed, he was ready to beat the crap out of it. When he crashes, the team put their arm around him and said, don't worry about it, Nico, we'll be better next time. And it's a very team-orientated sport to a point. And that point is the guy on the bike. And I thought it was actually great just to see. It's not selfishness from Locke, but it's that moment that is his moment more so than it's the team's moment or anyone else's.
That's what Canepa was talking about, self-belief, is that he took a step up in self-belief. Maybe, like for Alex Lowe's in Kawasaki and now Bimota, the big name rider not being around for different reasons, and unfortunately,
the same big name rider.
Yeah, but for especially unfortunate reasons by injury, and last year was the same, and in some places, there's a lot more expectation can fall on the other rider, and not every rider's up to it. I think what Canepa was indicating at the weekend, what I can feel from Locatelli, who just wears his heart, for such a guy who tries to be so controlled and calmed and everything else, he wears his heart on his sleeve, like, completely. He's not remonstrating, throwing things around. He's not that kind of Italian rider. But, yeah, he's as passionate as any of the rest of them. It's just quiet, burning away. When he stares at you, when he says something, he's not joking. He's absolutely dead serious. So, yeah, I'm delighted for them. I'm delighted for Crescent. I mean, the Crescent team is also half Italian. There's the Italian side, the Geno Delesmo guys who are the technical, etc., and then there's Crescent who bring the mechanics in general. So it's a really interesting team, and they have managed to work together really, really well. I mean, that whole thing, I don't think there's been a big clash. I think it's fair to say that there was quite a big clash between the British side of SMR and BMW and the German side of BMW. When they first started working together, there were differences of opinion, differences of approach, differences of philosophy, although both Northern European countries with strong work ethics, etc. I think it was just a misconnection. It's now been obviously cleared. Like they seem to work together really well. Crescent and Yamaha seem to have had that, for a long time. It's a long time since Crescent's with Yamaha. They started out Suzuki, remember, but they've been partners together for a long time.
Yeah, since 2016. And Gordo, when you look at it as well, obviously weekend of firsts. We had Locatelli's first win. We also had Sam Lowes with his first career pole and his first podium in World SBK.
I mean, you'd have to be a very hard-hearted person to not be happy for for Sam, for his whole team, for everybody involved. Mark VDS they'd done lots of different things, but they were Grand Prix guys who came to World Superbike as well. It's a weird thing. I mean, I was surprised and delighted that they decided, okay, we're going to do a Superbike thing. It took Sam a lot last year. He had good people and good team all around him. It just didn't work this year. It's obviously working. He's better. He's more understanding. He seems to be working better with the crew. They've got Leon Camier in charge of it, who's vastly experienced, with probably more freedom to be Leon Camier as a team manager because he's not working for a massive manufacturer. He's working for a team. When you look at that team, there's an awful lot of good people in it. Well, there's the same last year. But what's happening this year is they're all getting to understand their jobs, everybody else. The harmony in the team seems a lot better. And finally, Sam is now, maturing to say, okay, I don't need to win this in the first lap. His head's in a better place. We have always known how talented he is. Nearly Moto2 champion, World Supersport champion. I mean, that's a talented rider we're talking about here. But that big team with a big rep and a big profile, with all those people in it, at Assen, that's a place to do it. And he took pole. I mean, I didn't see that. I thought there was always going to be somebody who would beat him to that. He might get a podium here and there. He might even win a race if it works out really well, eventually in the season. But again, at round 3, with a new system involved, he's on it. He got taken out in the first race. That would have broken the mentality of a lot of riders. And what did he do? He went on and did better. He was podium. He got on the podium and then 4th.
I was just going to say, Gordo, I thought his reaction to that was really interesting.
Incredible.
Because he wasn't coming into the media centre throwing toys out. He was very clear, I've done this to people. They've done it to me. And guess what? That's racing. I've just got to be able to get up tomorrow morning and go again. And sure enough, he could get up the next morning and go again. Yeah,
and he got a podium the next day. I was amazed. When we saw the post-crash at the side of the track, one of the marshals came up on a scooter to take someone back, and turned around, and it looked as if it was maybe going to be Batista at first, and then it turned out to be Sam. And so Sam got on the scooter, Batista come up to him, and you're thinking, oh, here we go. There's going to be words. Something's going to happen. And they were hugging each other. And then Sam came up to the media centre later that day and gave us all the stuff. I mean, it was amazing.
It was interesting, the contrast to that and what we saw on lap 1 in Portimao for Batista.
Yes, and an even better example was the inter-Italian war between Bulega and Bassani in Superpole, when Bulega says that Bassani looked round, saw him coming and actually moved across, or it didn't move off the racing line and spoiled a lap for Bulega, who was very demonstrably annoyed.
It was interesting actually about that one, Gordo, because at the time, we didn't really see an awful lot of it on the broadcast.
No.
But I spoke to the FIM and they said Bimota didn't protest it. Sean Muir went up on Toprak's behalf because there was more of a case for Toprak than there was for Bassani. But as it was, they weren't pushing the issue either. Toprak said it was fair cop, and everyone kind of moved on from it.
Toprak said to us at the first opportunity afterwards, said, "Look, I looked behind me and saw Bassani, who was obviously not fast. Because of Bassani, I didn't see anything else behind me. So that's, I did look behind and didn't see. He obviously didn't realise how fast Bulega was behind Bassani and tramping on." She said, but, it's true, he was slowed down and everything else. So he wasn't bothered about the penalty. He's like, so what? It happened. He said, he's sorry for Bulega. He said, but he didn't see him. He said, all I saw was Bassani, who was clearly not trying to overtake him. And he thought, okay, well, we're fine here. So, yeah, you got to, just to be fair to everybody. And Bassani said, look, he didn't say he did it deliberately, obviously, but he said, look, I understand why Bulega told me to certain word off. He says, I get it. He says, I would have done the same thing. He says, I understand that obviously he was slowed down. He says, I understand it. It's fine. He said, it's racing. It happens. He says, I can understand he was angry. So it was a kind of weird. There was a lot going on in the weekend. When I was doing my intro for my magazine things for Australian Motorcycle News and Cycle News in America, when I was sitting down Sunday night writing about this, I started writing and had to stop because I thought, I can't get all this in. All those individual stories, I just don't have space for it. So I ended up writing a bit news stories later for some of it. But it was a weekend of endlessly interesting and weird and dramatic things happening. Funnily enough, at the Cathedral, the classic venue in Europe for motorcycle racing, the oldest place we still go to. We don't go Monza anymore. There's a few other places. Assen's the old granddaddy sitting out there on his own, constantly changed, constantly updated, and still providing. And even just the stuff at the chicane, every year you think, well, it can't be as dramatic as chicane this year. What class wasn't it? I mean, more or less, what class wasn't the complete chaos, mate? It was mental.
Let's move on to the other classes then, Gordo, because we had a home winner in 300s. Jeffrey Bowes did the double. We had a home winner with Bo Benschneider, who I've now been told by our Dutch commentary colleagues to call the Bo Show, which I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to do. But you've still got Stefano Manzi leading the championship. It was the Dutch rider against the Dutch team. Chanon Chu came through to win. So it was a great weekend.
Yeah, the super sport class is off a scale now. And okay, we're getting some races where a rider can make a break and so on, but usually not. And loads of drama. I mean, they're obviously really pushing each other, different bikes. It's definitely not a Ducati Cup in that class. And again, we talk a lot about tech and rules and everything else. The greatest performance addition that anyone can have to their team is the rider. You can have an okay team and an okay rider and an okay bike, but a really good rider, and they'll get the maximum out of everything. If you want to be a world champion or win races, you need to have a great team, a great bike, and a great rider. Great enough. But the biggest thing is you can do it all you like without a rider that's capable of making that change and difference. Look at MV this year. What's the big difference at MV? It seems to be Bo Schneider.
Yeah.
We could call him Bo Schneider. Bo Schneider sounds better. Bo Benschneider. But Bo Schneider sounds better to me. But that's...
Bo Schneider.
Yeah, it sounds like
Bo Schneider, the Ghost Rider. But he's very impressive, is Ben Schneider. Like, you look at him and he's did the 2 rounds at the end of last year. I think he was top 4 in all of them. He had a couple of podiums. This season he started off, he's been top 4 in every race. He's had podiums in 5 of the 6. It just so happens that you're up against the immovable object that is Stefano Manzi. Manzi's been top 2 in every race this season. And even though Manzi, if you put a gun to the man's head and said you have to qualify well, he's going to be killed straight away. But if you give him just the opportunity to race, he's going to kill everyone else. And he's such an interesting rider, Gordo, because of that. And I know that when he tested the Yamaha Superbike, it didn't go well. But the man just can't test. He doesn't like to do 1 laps. When you speak to people within Tenkate, they talk about how infuriating he is when they go testing. But then they know once they get to a race, he's just going to give it everything he has and he's going to go out there and win it.
He's a very individual character. There, I said it. You can read that way any way you like. He's a very individual character, which is part of the reason maybe he doesn't have a Moto2. It didn't happen.
Yep.
But on a bike that you could get the maximum out of, he's the guy that gets the maximum out of it. And this could be his year. It's only 14 points between first and second, but it's Manzi that's on the top. That bike is better than anybody assumed it would be, and I think particularly in race conditions, it does seem to be a good race bike, even though there's an awful lot of road bike in that compared to the much more race-oriented R6 that it replaced. The MV Agusta is a very old design, but it's very race-focused. The Ducati is a 955 that's having to be held back because of what it is. The Triumph is no mug bike and it's got a good rider on it. But there's a lot of... And even Alcoba, the addition of 36cc and a few other things to the Kawasaki ZX6R this year with, a former MotoGP rider on it. One rider, one team, still not quite fit with his hand, maybe now, but not at the start of the season, is in 7th position in the championship. So we're going to read up from 7th. We've got Kawasaki, supposedly nowhere, now back in the mix. Mahias in a Yamaha, Masia in a Ducati, Onshi on a Yamaha, Booth Amos, 3rd in the World Championship in a Triumph, Ben Schneider, 2nd in the World Championship on an MV Agusta, and Manzi on another Yamaha. So, okay, the Yamahas are the bike in the majority there, but they deliberately had 6 official, blessed, tested together, etc. riders for the new project, or a new way of doing Yamaha Supersport racing, which is the R9 triple, not the R6 4-cylinder. So, World Supersport, we could do whole programs with World Supersport because it's so interesting. We can't, it's not the big class, and people need to understand that. But this is a class with the greatest variety the most often, while having Manzi, Ben Snyder as your probably 2 favourites now.
Yeah, I think that Supersport is more than interesting enough on its own. And it's something that wasn't the case years ago. But we just don't have the time to cover the support classes in detail. And that brings us to 300 Gordo, where Jeffrey Bowes has won 3 out of the 4 races. There's 15 points separating the top 3 in the championship. Julio Garcia and Benyat Fernandez up there as well. Fernandez in as a rookie and 4 top 5s to start the season. Carter Thompson's up there 5th in the championship. And obviously, Gordo, for your Aussie MCN, it's always important to have Australian riders up there. But he's had top 6s in all 4 races so far this season. 300s, as ever, went right down to the wire.
Yeah, I mean, the races in Assen, and I think because it's such a fluid track, were a bit less stressful than some of the stop-go tracks, because it's those under-braking, slow corners, diving up the inside, blocking people on the outside. There was a lot of that Assen, but it was all at higher speed and therefore a little bit less. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but a wee bit less stressful to watch.
Yeah.
But very, very enjoyable to watch. And obviously a bit of a sort out in the final chicane, and a few people got pinged and the top 6 results changed. But it's great racing in that class. It's run its course. And I think that when we have Sportbike next year and so on, it's got to be. But the racing is fantastic. It's just off the scale. It's just not very skillful for too many people. However, when you get somebody like Jeffrey Bowes, who's obviously designed and built for 300 racing, didn't have a great go at Supersport when he got the chance to go there. We spoke about that before, but to win both those races, and especially the second race, it just didn't look like he was gonna. And he still found everything to go, and won the second race by 1,000th of a second. 1,000th. And the crowd went nuts, and that's a big crowd at Assen. They might fundamentally all be stuck in 2 grandstands. The main one at the last chicane, and then one of the ones further out round the back. All the crowd seems to go to 2 places at Assen for the Superbikes. Obviously, MotoGP is full. But that's a good crowd we get. That's a real crowd you get at Assen. And they know their bike racing, they love it, and they got to see loads of Dutch guys winning and nearly winning and just certainly being in amongst the mix. You'd leave Assen this year, even though it was a bit wet eventually in the morning, you'd be leaving bouncing because the weather was great for most of the weekend. The racing was fantastic. The local guys done well. Assen is just, if you've never been, you have to go. You have to go. It's one of those circuits that you would, if we ever get Imola again, you have to go to Imola. If we ever go to Laguna again, you have to go to Laguna. We'll never go to Monza again. You should have went to Monza. Assen is absolutely in that top 5 of all-time World Supersport and Superbike race circuits.
Just to finish off the Assen weekend as well, Gordo, it was the first weekend of the WC, or the Women's Circuit Racing World Championship, and we were able to see Maria Herrera win the opening race from pole. Beatrice Nela finished on the podium in the first race and then wins the second race. They'll go to the next round in Cremona level on points. Sarah Sanchez started 3rd, finished 3rd for both races. And we had it again, Gordo, where we were actually able to see a bit of progress for this championship over the course of the winter, because suddenly we had Avalon Lewis in the mix as well. We had 4 riders in the lead group for both races. Av ended up having a spill at the last corner and dropped down the order a little bit. But for the most part, we were able to see 4 riders in the lead group. Someone like Roberta Ponziani would have been in there as well, but she had a bad start, finishes quite far down in terms of time rather than positions.
Yes.
But when you look at that second group, it looked a little bit more competitive this year than last year. It looked like instead of it being, again, 5 or 6 riders, there was 7 or 8 riders. it looks like riders have made that step forward. And most importantly, other than the likes of Simoes, the Portuguese rider, it was more competitive for the back of the field as well. I think that she's probably one of those riders that's going to have a little bit of a magnifying glass on her at Cremona, because she was nearly lapped in some of these races this weekend. But overall, we've been able to see a big step forward within the class.
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure we all could have predicted the top three in each race, and also each at the end of the points, barring disaster. We all knew that there was going to be new. I mean, Avalon Lewis was a miss from last year. To me, it would have been great if she was in last year. The standard at the top won't suffer because Anna Carrasco's not in it anymore, but I think it can only get better again. Getting somebody, 2 or 3 other riders, as we had with Avalon Lewis in the top 4, and then unfortunately crashing in the last. That's what we want. We want new names right at the top. But what you say with the midfield and everything else, there is no question. In summation, there is no question that this championship is more. It's a harder base. It's a higher base level for most riders, and the midfield's tightened up. And all those people like Ponziani, Tyler Elf, etc., they are now looking at how do I get into that lead mix, because I think I can be in that lead mix. I think I'm good enough. They're with everything being equal in that class, their self-belief and their ability to turn that self-belief into improved performance is their next thing. They've had a year of experience. They need to know how to move forward. It's a better. To me, it's a better prospect this year for more different things happening. And we expected Herrera to win both races. I did anyway after everything else. And even though she only won one race because her rival went on the green paint and was therefore and kind of pushed out the way, I thought she was going to win both races. I think she'd have enough because she's easily the most experienced, etc. And it didn't work out. She was beaten in the second one. Like fair and square. That's interesting. That in itself. It's a good class. It's necessary. It's required, but it's actually good racing. They're on R7 twins. They're not rocket ships, but the racing's good. As long as the powers that be are getting every year better and better female riders, creating them from inside or bringing them from outside, they're a great start at the front. The midfield's getting better. There will be, because of the nature of the championship, some riders at the back and who aren't going to make it, and that's fine. That's the same as every other racing class there's ever been.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where the selection process got tougher for this year, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out going forward as well. But definitely the class has made a step forward, and Gordo will go to Cremona in 2 weeks' time, and we'll see the WC order. There'll be no 300s, Super Sport, and a home return for Andrea Locatelli, a home round for Barney and for Danilo Petrucci, where he did the hat-trick last time. And with a bit of luck, the return of Jonathan Ray on the grid. Bulega out to prove that he's the man to beat, possibly with his contract in his back pocket for next year. Toprak out there trying to show that Portimao is what we can expect from him rather than Assen, and loads of other stuff. It's going to be a really interesting season. We're already a quarter of the way through the season, but it comes thick and fast now going forward because we've got Cremona and Most in the next couple of weeks. And then in June, we've got Misano. So that takes us up to halfway point of the season. But it's one of those rounds I'm already looking forward to Cremona. And it surprised all of us last year because it was actually a really cool event last year, wasn't it, Gordy?
It was a lot better than... We'd heard a lot of things about it. It never even hosted an Italian national championship race before. We were all like, okay, right. There was definitely a bit of cynicism. Okay, people tested there, and the main thing we came away from was that great big mad hump and then bowl of the last section, and a huge long straight that isn't actually straight. And then the rest of it was like, from a map, it looks like a go-kart track, and you're hanging, and it was actually really good. It was a great wee event. It was actually a great big event because the crowd were there in numbers and shouting their heads off and got to see something unique and first time and wonderful. And now this year they're going to get to see Toprak,
And
who we didn't even have last year. So it's even more.
More than anything, it has a Michelin-starred sushi restaurant in Italy that cost about 25 quid for your dinner. So I'm recommending that as the round everyone goes to. There's a great Indian. There's a great Thai restaurant. You don't need to eat pizza, because I found the pizza was a bit shit.
Where were you eating? Oh no, the pizza me and Chippy had in the little town we were in, Bozzolo, I think it was called, was unbelievably good. I mean, it was so
Chippy's
good.
a bozo, not a bozo.
Well, but don't let him hear you say that. Not in public.
The one thing about it is Cremona, it's a little bit like Most, because it came onto the calendar and everyone wanted to hate it. And instead, it's pretty quickly become one of the favourite ones, Gordo.
Yeah, I think the thing about it is that everybody knew Most, and the old Most, without being disrespectful to the kind of commie designed old style, safety is not an issue, Most. And a lot of people had raced there, tested there and that, and were like, oh, right. But they made a lot of changes. They still need to make more. There's a couple of bits of the track that, we have to say in a public thing like this that still need a degree of safety work on them, absolutely. And hopefully they'll keep going with that. But every year they've made improvements to it. But Cremona was such an unknown. I mean, really, because we couldn't even rely. I mean, I said to one of the Italian guys, so what's it like for it? I've never seen this. I've obviously missed this on the Italian National Championship thing. And he said, well, we don't go. It's like, so, I said, I've never been there either. And you're like, wow, that is weird. It's like Carnaby or somewhere. So, there's going to be a World Championship event at Carnaby. Carnaby? Because if they said there's going to be a World Championship event at Knockhill, everybody in BSB's been in Knockhill.
Yeah.
The factory Honda, HRC, Michelin, BSB team used to go tyre test in Knockhill. People knew what Knockhill was. I didn't even know it was a racetrack in Cremona until they put it on the calendar.
Well, it was
two different things. It was two different things. It was a kind of and that obviously has an effect. And there was a bit of a silly power supply issue last year, which somebody somewhere just didn't. There wasn't quite enough redundancy or whatever in place. Doesn't matter. First time. That's happened at other racetracks that have been running for years. Yeah, I agree with you. I think Cremona was a surprisingly popular event last year. And I think if it had been 3 dull races or 3 races won by, somebody in a dull fashion, that's fine. But it was Petrucci after almost being killed in a training accident a few months before, coming on and winning 3 races at home from a local team. No, they could drive a bus through the things that need to be finalised at Cremona, the parking, everything else. Fine. But as a racetrack, it was actually surprisingly interesting and challenging. It's difficult. It's tricky. It's an easy place to fall off.
I think one thing just to mention, you mentioned about the power issue last year. It's going to be something that's brought up in the build-up to Cremona. It's worth remembering the race was red flagged because there was no communications to the marshal posts. The LED light boards didn't work. At the time, some people thought it was because there was no TV footage, but it was because of a safety issue. But Cremona, that was one of the problems they had last year. That'll be fixed for this year.
Yeah,
the parking looks like it should be better this year as well, because we were in a field last year. But overall, I'd recommend this one to anyone looking to go to an Italian round.
And the thing to remember is that they weren't expecting. They were working towards having a World Superbike round, but not last year. That only came about because of the speed of which we lost 2 long haul races, and suddenly Dorna have to find 2 more races in Europe, and bing, the Cremona people turned up with this thing. I've got zero criticism of them.
Yeah.
Considering what the short space they had to do it in, nothing. I've got no criticism. They were coming to the job a year too early, and they did a great job. I want to go to Monza. If we're going to go to Lombardy, let's go to Monza. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. MotoGP won't go to Monza. So we'll go where people want us, and we'll go where it's fun. And the biggest thing for me is I don't want to go to 12 Qatars. I don't want to go to 12 Aragons. I want to go to Aragon. I'd love to go back to Qatar. But I don't want to go to 12 of them. I don't want to go to 12 Cremonas. What we've got, when you look at the layout, the actual tracks in the championship, to me are really interesting racetracks, even if they're not purpose-built, designed from ground up FIM places. And guess what? That's part of the reason why they're good racetracks, because they're not designed as you're meeting every single FIM requirement from day one. Now, safety is my number one thing. If we're not safe and safe enough, we shouldn't go anywhere. I don't want to go somewhere that's not safe.
I think, Gordo, just as you mentioned that, let's have a little quick look at the calendar just before we finish up. We start off in Phillip Island, by the sea, the fastest, most fantastic racetrack we go to in World SBK. Then you go to the undulating nature of Portimao, the history of Assen. Again, you've got the slow section at the start of the lap, and then it opens up to be super fast by the end of it. Cremona is very different to all of those. Most is more corners than anywhere we go to in the shortest space of time. Then you go to Misano, a track that was designed to be ran the other way around. Then you've got Donington. Again, you've got the undulating sections of that. And then you move into Hungary, a brand new track for this year. We'll see what Balloton Park's like. But it's definitely a little bit different to everywhere else. And then Magny, Aragon, Estoril, and Jerez. There's something different at each of these venues in terms of the theory behind how they were designed and built. And I think that's what makes it really interesting when you look at our calendar.
I'm a track junkie as much as I'm the racing junkie. I want to go and see a wonderful play in an incredible theatre. I don't want to see it in some municipal building, you know. I want it to be, or if it is a municipal building, we do it in the car park, you know, just to make it different again. That's the way I feel about racetracks. I want to go to a variety of racetracks. I want to go to different cultures. I want to go see different places. The biggest loss we've had is the long haul races, through no fault of our own, frankly. They were all ready to go. They were cancelled by the host venues or the financial supporters of the host venues. So we're making up for it by what? With tracks full of character. I like tracks that have got character. I'd love to go back to Brands Hatch until and unless they change the track, which might ruin it, or find a way to get the barriers to go further back. We're probably never going to go back to Brands Hatch for lots of different reasons. And that is a blooming shame. But we still go to Donington, which is straight out of Mother Nature's larder, except for a little bit behind the pits. And even that offers 3 passing and drama opportunities. So, you know, Mother Nature's Kitchen is the best place to go and eat racing. That's it. It's you can tell I've not had my lunch properly yet. It's, you know what I mean? It's absolutely, it's about one of the most compelling things for me. Watching races on TV is fantastic, but nothing beats being there, smelling it, feeling it, hearing it, understanding it, being in the culture of the place you go to. If people aren't going to go to a race this year, they should. They should go to a race. If it's a local one, great. They should go and travel and see World Superbike in the Raw. And if you want to go to somewhere like Misano, Phillip Island, you know, Portimao, you can have a buzzing holiday with a family at the same time. You know, there's something for everybody. The hardcore race nuts are going to go to the East Midlands of England. You know what I mean? But there's something for everybody. The crowd at Magny-Cours is usually raining. It's in the middle of France. It's not near anywhere except Magny-Cours. And the bazillions of French fans turn up and really get off on it. And it's also very close to the Ball d'Or, where they also go in its traditional place in the thousands. You know, it's real racing in real places. That's, to me, is one of the big attractions of World Superbike.
Yeah. And obviously for us here on the Paddock Pass podcast, we'll be covering it all the way through the season. Check out patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast for more of our additional content as well. We'll be back later in the week with some MotoGP shows. And I know that Adam's got a pretty cool show coming up where he breaks down his experience at Barber Motorsport as well in the museum. So check that out on Patreon. And then we'll have our previews for the Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez coming up next week before our Paddock Note shows throughout the course of the Jerez weekend. We've got lots of competitions coming up on Patreon as well. So patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. If you sign up, you'll enter our draws for some of our upcoming competitions. They're for copies of Adam's book. They're for Paddock Passes to Dutch TT and some other competitions as well. So keep an eye on Patreon for that. As it is, myself, Gordo, and Evo will be back before Cremona. And the plan at Cremona is on the Thursday, we're going to have Andrea Locatelli join us for our Patreon show as well. And with a bit of luck, Jonathan Ray's back as well, and Johnny's going to join us on the pod as well. So we'll bring that to you on the Thursday at Cremona. But Gordo, thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, mate.
And as ever, a big thank you to Renthal Street and Pole Position Travel for supporting the Paddock Pass podcast. Check out polepositiontravel.com for all their options available at each Grand Prix and World Superbike round of the season.